Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new revenge stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
The first one is titled, "You Want to Threaten a LIEN on My House? Bring it on." This story begins almost a year ago. I received a call from an unknown number on my cell phone. It was an automated message to call a 888 number in regards to serving me papers. I knew right away this may have been a collection agency. Googled the number and confirmed it. Now I have to disclose I did have identity theft almost 20 years ago. To this day I occasionally get calls from collection agencies trying to collect on some debt from 20 plus years ago that was cleared. Now most of the time when I get these calls, I ask for their address to send in a dispute letter including the accompanying data for proof that I had identity theft. Granted they should not be calling me, but they apologize and I don't get another call. Plus they usually mail me back and said they closed the account. Well, I go to call this person and I got to say the call was interesting. This woman answered and I gave her my information. She started rattling off a debt that was back in 1995. I let her finish and I told her that I had no knowledge and there was identity theft. And as soon as I said that, she freaked out. She kept saying she knew the debt was mine and I'm going to pay. I kept telling her that I wanted to mail a letter. But she flat out refused. When I told her I knew my rights, she said that I had the right to pay the debt. She then said that she is going to put a lien on my huge pretty house, her words, and she was describing the house to the letter. She also said she is going to put a lien on my Lexus that she sees in the driveway. And she said that my gate in the front won't stop the repossession. She then hung up. Now I knew better. All she did was get my info from public records and then saw my house on Google Street View. My guess is that she tried to push this intimidation on other people that know better. So far it appeared to be a very disreputable company. I also had phone recordings when I called in. And they were legal as I asked her if phone calls can be recorded for quality control purposes. She said of course. And I said thank you, I'll take that as my consent. I would have just let this go and just say this lady was crazy. But I kept getting the automated phone calls and I couldn't block them as they were unknown. I googled the company and I thought they were in Ohio. A couple of flags that led me to believe that the person who owned this company in Ohio was being indicted with charges whom was an attorney. I placed a complaint with the Ohio Attorney General. They couldn't find any information on what I was submitting. They did call the phone number I gave them and the Attorney General told me they would stop from calling me. But that is all the Attorney General could do. I also complained to the Federal Consumer Finance Bureau whom is supposed to be looking into these issues. But they blew my off. Well, 3 months later, I called this number. I had an idea of maybe pressing buttons when I called in to see if I could get more information about the company through the IVR. Well, that paid off. As soon as I pressed 0, I got a different company name. I googled that company and got tons of complaints. This led me to the company existing in NY. I complained to the Attorney General of NY with all of my info. I done quite a bit of research over the next couple of weeks and found out a whole bunch of information such as the owner. Found out that the address where the company no longer received mail was at the owner's address, their Facebook account, etc. I then got another one of those unknown phone calls. But this time, it's a different company. I'm sure you get what I'm getting at. The company just keeps changing the name, but the parent company still calls. I finally had enough of this. I get a private investigator involved and they were quite satisfied with all the information I got so far. So I let him do his business. Well, he calls me back saying that this company isn't even registered and it's ran by this one lady. I find out the rude lady whom I am talking to is the supposed owner, but not running a legitimate business. I got a process server to file a claim in NY. Granted, I think I could have done it where I was at. But I was heading up to that area in NY anyway as I had some family reasonably close. Problem was she was not able to be served. The house which she owned, she was not able to be served at. Either she was not there or was staying somewhere else. Well, my private investigator started sending out friend requests to her and the people in her friends lists. Well, her friends, and then she accepted the Facebook request. My private investigator found out that she cheated on her boyfriend about a month ago since she posted that crap. The private investigator gave me an idea of trying to reach her boyfriend, and if he can lead us to serve her, I will give him $500. Well, we did that, and sure enough we were finally able to serve this lady at her parents' house about 20 miles from where she was at. I fly up to NY, and since it's small claims, it's just me and this lady. For some reason her mother is there too, but she is not representing. I give the judge all of my info I had over the months and how she broke the law. She broke debt collection laws and threats over the phone. After the judge heard all the trouble I had with these calls and how she hid her identity purposely, the judge gave me the maximum amount of $3,000. In NY, small towns and villages are limited to $3,000. After the case, I heard her mother loudly whispering, but I heard it. "You better hope he doesn't take your house. Your great-grandfather built this with his own bare hands." I was thinking, it would be sweet revenge if I could actually put a lien on the house. Well, lo and behold, I found out the house had a second mortgage attached to it. With the property value of the house, and if it sold, I wouldn't end up getting the lien money since the secondary mortgage was almost as much as the house. I was then contemplating how I was going to get the money from this lady. My private investigator calls me 5 months later and said her house is going into foreclosure. I get a proxy to bid for me. But as in most foreclosure actions, the bank buys it back as an REO. I decided to send in a low-ball offer to buy the house a couple of months later. The bank accepted my offer. My guess is that it's a small town and trying to get the right market was an issue. You may be wondering why I even bought this house? Well, here's why. This witch threatened to put a lien on my house with no merit. Well, guess what? I ducking took her house. It was completely worth it. It didn't cost me too much and I had the money. The house is actually in decent shape, just a little small. Plus it will be a nice summer home when I go to visit my relatives. Oh, and I decided to rub in salt to the wound. I sent a letter to her parents' address letting them know I took the house. I told them that if her daughter wouldn't be in the business of scamming people, they may not have lost the house. I also go to find out that the Attorney General of NY is now investigating this lady. I hope they throw the book at her. Not going to mention the collection agency, but if you stopped getting phone calls from them, you're welcome. The next one is titled, "Don't Think I Am Worth the Money. Kiss Your Income Goodbye." So I was living in a town where there was an old hotel that was in the process of being converted to apartments. Ended up moving in and at some point started to help the owner, let's call him Steve, out with a lot of stuff. Started with little odd jobs here and there, helping tear out a wall or take debris out. No big deal, really made a few extra bucks. Being a geek, it didn't take long to start ending up helping handle some other stuff. They had internet access available, but it was using HPNA, so basically in-home DSL over lines in a 50-year-old building. They slowly were adding more people here and there, so adding more capacity ended up being my job as well as handling the installs and troubleshooting. Building had its own cable system as well, and it had issues with some stuff overheating. Came up with a design that would simplify the build out somewhat and remove the issue of overheating boxes, as well as adding more room for channels to be added and creating a type of scrolling TV guide channel using Titan.tv and an auto-scroll plugin in the browser, then piping it onto a channel and adding some music. Before long I was handling most of the maintenance for all the apartments, internet, cable, lockouts and whatever else might be needed. Then Steve's stepdaughter moved in and things started to happen that were fishy, my information being removed as the lockout number among other things. So I gracefully moved on and got out of the way, as I didn't want to be in the middle of family. I also had no hard feelings for Steve over what the daughter or her husband was doing. I still got calls with questions and would answer them here and there. About 6 months after moving out, I got a call that Steve needed help as the boiler system was acting up and basically the building did not have heat. I went down and helped get things tore apart since the daughter's husband couldn't be bothered. He moved out of a house because he didn't want to take care of things even though the wife did most of it. Ended up the fins on the boiler had clogged up with soot during startups over a few years. We cleaned it all out and got it up and running, disaster averted. Owner had another project he wanted some help with, so rather than turn down some extra cash I figured why not. We ran a small water line from the top of multiple plumbing shafts to the basement so that a set of valves could be put into place so the recirculation pump would be able to evenly get water through the lines and everyone would have instant hot water. Ended up moving back to the area a couple months later as I started helping Steve with an even larger building nearby. The old hotel, converted to apartments, was 10 stories tall, so not small but didn't need a lot done most of the time. The new place was not as tall but was larger and more spread out. One section had 3 floors and the whole thing sat on something nearly the size of a city block. I think total square footage was around 50k inside. I was taking care of the apartment maintenance needs and a few other things again, as well as staying in the building with my wife, who was acting as a lookout in the evenings. During the day I would help out with whatever was going on. We literally reworked a lot of structural steel, reclad one section of the building with corrugated steel sheets, extended one section of the building and poured concrete floors and retaining walls. I started having issues here and there with getting overheated during the day, heat stroke, and while I was living there I had not actually moved yet, so ended up taking a week to put most of our things in storage. We were literally living at the building in an RV. I had to keep the building secure. When I got back, Steve started complaining that the power for the building was $100 and blamed it on me running an air conditioner. We had been running a 220 welder on average 4 hours a day 5 days a week, but it had to be that AC unit, and basically said there was no way I could keep an eye on things if it was running because I couldn't hear anything. It had been over a month straight with highs over 100 degrees, but with another roof over my RV it never got direct heat, so I called BS, as my 2-bedroom apartment I just vacated only had electric costs around $120 per month, and it was all electric with a lot more items using power, including my aquarium. A question was then made about what I thought I was worth. I figured $10 per hour. I dealt with a lot, including maintenance on all the machinery in his vehicle, and never charged for fuel or mileage when I would drive my own vehicle to do things. For as long as I worked for the guy, the first always had to bid my jobs outside of maintenance work. I was only receiving a flat amount of money each month for the work in the building, and my wife received nothing for keeping an eye out, which she did pretty well of since I actually caught a teenage kid in the building with her seeing them. Steve stated that no one was worth $10 per hour to him. Other things were being thrown out as my fault too. Basically, Steve was under the gun on a couple things, as when he bought the building it was actually scheduled to be torn down, and another building across the road which was also scheduled to be torn down was bought slightly after he purchased his, yet it had already been completely rehabilitated and was opening up space for lease. The other building was smaller but had quite a bit more to have done to get it up to code. The roof was completely gone and the inside was so full of trash it took nearly a month to clean it out. Steve kept changing things after something was done and then turning around and changing them again, wasting more and more time. A lot of other things were going on as well, so I opted to be done and move on again, this time with no option of going back. My wife's health had started going downhill anyway, so being blamed for petty crap wasn't worth it, and I obviously was not wanted around anymore. Now here is the revenge. I had told him multiple times that there was an issue with his fire alarm panel not charging the batteries. The local fire department had been on him once before and forced more smoke detectors to be installed as a retrofit and a few other things. The smoke detectors were installed, but the battery charging issue was never fixed properly. Other things in the building had also started to fall into disrepair that I had told him needed to be dealt with. For instance, some very large windows were cracked and a few had pieces broken with tenants in them. It was a two-man job to fix the windows, and Steve had too many irons in the fire. He had sunk over $500k into the new building and either couldn't afford to have someone else do the work or didn't think it was worthwhile, so he kept putting it off. I went ahead and contacted the city about issues that needed to be addressed, as well as dropped some complaints about things. I used multiple email addresses from accounts I set up for exactly that purpose, so it would never track back to me, and contacted multiple members of the city council as well as the fire chief marshal. I never contacted Steve again, but the last time I was there the apartment building was shut down with signs stating that it could not be occupied. Since the fire alarm panel had been written up on once before due to issues, and he had been told that if it became a problem again a sprinkler system would be required to bring the building up to code. With it acting up again, the fire marshal shut it all down. The new building is now off the demolition list, but it once again sits empty as there is likely not enough money left to pull from the apartment building to make it complete. You see, being off the list only required it to be warehouse grade, which is basic lighting, emergency lighting, mostly airtight, with egress and fire systems. Once that was done, more work would be needed to actually start using the structure for office space and things of that nature. Going from 100 apartments to 23 with a few rent houses that needed work likely took the last little bit of money he had free to do things. The apartment building was truly unsafe, as if the power went out the fire alarm panel would not function, and with a tall building a fire on a lower floor would lead to pure disaster. All he had to do was fix it so the batteries were charged and would stay that way, and pay someone to work on the panel if it was acting up. But then again, no one was worth $10 an hour. Why would he pay someone who is going to make even more than that? I felt bad for most of the people who lived there since they lost their home, but I would have felt worse if they were hurt or worse in a fire. The one thing I wish I had seen was the stepdaughter and her husband's faces while they had to move. They were on the top floor. As well as Steve's and his wife's face when the building was basically condemned. But I still go back and look at the news article showing it was all shut down and have a little smile. It just doesn't pay to be a jerk when someone has tried to help you out. The next one is titled, "Shortchange Your Workers?" It might just come back to haunt you. For context, I started work at a frozen yogurt shop, Malicious, at age 14. Here in the US, there's loads of laws governing how much and how often those under the age of 16 can work. But many employers are willing to ignore it simply because their employees don't know any better. Anyways, fast forward a few months and I'm basically the #1 employee for any job nobody else will do, because being 14 at the time I thought that my boss was king. They would always have me close the store by myself, which is important in this story later. Usually, there had to be a shift lead or a manager in the store at all times, but for some reason, although I was neither, I was always assigned the 8+ hour closing shift solo. I was making minimum wage for this kind of work, so needless to say when I found out what the actual managers and shift leads were making I was upset. They were making triple my wage. So I hatched a brilliant little plan for revenge and, if everything went well, some cash to sweeten the deal. So I put in my 2 weeks at the beginning of the pay period, so that my last day would also be payday. When that fateful last day rolled around, I collected my check and started my shift as usual. Another thing you should know is my location had a tip jar, but the employees got none of the tips. It all went straight to management at the end of the pay period. Supposedly so they could divide it up equally. They didn't between the employees. Before closing, I took the entire jar full of bills and coins, and walked out the door. I wish the story ended there, but it doesn't. The next day, it was time to count tips. I woke up to 8 missed calls from crazy owner, and a text message threatening legal action if I didn't return the tips. Here's where the pro-revenge starts. As soon as I heard the words, legal action, I was overjoyed. I knew something she didn't. Before leaving, I had printed off all 52 of my time sheets for the year, with every hour I had worked down to the minute. I responded that she could go ahead and call the cops, but I also said that OHSA, America's labor regulatory body, and Malicious corporate would be interested to find out that a location had been defying labor laws for years. To top it all off, I sent a photo of my pile of timesheets. I never heard from her again. I'm guessing she decided that a few hundred in tips was easier to replace than a few grand in fines for breaking labor laws, but I got the last laugh. You see, even after she left me alone, I still reported her to corporate. Not sure exactly what happened, but long story short, that location is now owned by corporate, and is no longer a franchise. The next one is titled, "Never Felt Such a Sense of Instant Karma." I've worked at the same company for over 6 years. I was a loyal, good employee with a perfect track record. Over the 6 years I've only called in sick twice. I had the best results, the least amount of errors on paperwork in the whole region and quite possibly the whole country. My new boss decided that that wasn't enough. He minimized my hours, they get a bonus to keep labor low, expanded my workload and never had anything nice to say. He seemed to think ruling with an iron fist is the way to go about this. Even after all this, I'm the one who kept his head above water, fixing his errors along the way. So today I resign my position with immediate effect, which in terms cancelled his vacation plans for next week. On top of that, there is no one to fill my position. As soon as I mouthed the words, "I quit," you could see the terror in his eyes. He realized how ducked he was without me and tried to do whatever he could to keep me for at least another week. I've never felt such a sense of instant karma as today. I never meant to cancel his vacation, but I wasn't going to put his needs before mine. I have bills to pay. I'd feel bad about it if he wasn't such a prick. But he's a prick. I hope my story inspires someone, even if only one single person out there, to not just bend over and take it, but to realize they deserve to be treated better and that the only thing that's stopping someone to reach their full potential is themselves. As far as workplace situations go, you spend a great deal of your life at your place of employment. It shouldn't be a place you dread to be. The next one is titled, "Out of Principle." I worked as a database administrator for a community center for one summer in college. Basically, I created a database for them to track who was donating to them and how much they were donating, and who was volunteering at the center and for how many hours. Very simple work, and despite being the youngest person on staff by about 25 to 30 years, I got along well with all of my coworkers except for my immediate boss, who was a total witch. The next spring, I was applying for jobs and emailed my old boss to ask for a letter of recommendation. Much to my surprise, she told me that she didn't write recommendation letters out of principle. I was pretty upset about it because I was finding it very difficult to find a position, and not being able to count on my most recent employer for a reference was a definite blemish on my resume. However, in spite of this, I managed to land a decent job. Lo and behold, my old boss emails me on day one of my new job, begging me to come in because she had somehow ignored all the warnings in the user documentation I wrote and moved some files around, rendering it impossible for her to access the database. She asked if I would come in, and I emailed her back and told her I already had a job and couldn't do it out of principle, effectively rendering my entire summer at the center a waste of time from their perspective. The last one is titled, "Tipped Off the Right People." We were drinking together one night, this was during our friends phase, and he described in detail a tax scheme that he had engaged in that was very illegal. I just nodded and laughed as it didn't bother me at the time, and we were, again, friends at that point. Fast forward to 6 months later, the guy revealed himself to be a true a-hole, and I decided to leave the company. I work in a relatively small industry, and I heard that he was bad-mouthing me to other people and trying to get me blackballed. While my first inclination was to drive over to his favorite bar and beat the heck out of him in front of his friends, but I decided that me getting arrested for battery would probably not be beneficial. So I waited about 6 months and tipped a few of the right people to my former pal's scam. This included his ex-wife's divorce attorney, his probation officer. Full disclosure, he was on probation at the time for another offense. However, he couldn't be involved in any criminal activity during that time, including conspiracies, and several agencies whose primary job is to investigate tax malfeasance. As it turns out, I really only needed to tip his ex's attorney, and she did all the rest of the legwork for me. In the end, and yes, I did sort of keep track of what happened, he was rearrested, his probation was revoked, his wife got a larger settlement, and he spent the remainder of his deferred sentence portion in jail. When he got out, he left the area, and I have neither seen nor heard from him since. Thanks for listening.